So good afternoon, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us on this conversation on freebies, social welfare reform, and sustainable human development. So for me to understand, how does freebies differ from what is good and sustainable and social welfare development programs for the people of our country? For this debate, joining me today are three very illustrious names, proud sons of India. There's Dr. Rathin Roy, eminent public finance economist, former member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, former senior policy advisor in UNDP with various positions, currently Professor Kautilya School of Public Policy at Hyderabad, and Senior Advisor, Overseas Development Institute, London. He is also a columnist with Economic Times. Thank you, Rathin, for joining us. Also joining us today is Dr. Santosh Mehrotra, leading labor economist, former member Planning Commission, and Professor JNU, Senior Advisor, UNDP and UNICEF, currently visiting professor at the University of Bath in the United Kingdom. He is also a noted newspaper columnist and commentator. Dr. Kamal Malhotra, an eminent political and development economist, senior fellow, Boston University Global Development Policy Center, former United Nations Secretary General representative in Malaysia, again in Turkey, and also in Vietnam. He is also a major commentator and writer on global issues. So, and I am the editor of Cross-Section Conversations. The first question, for the non-specialist, for the relatively uninitiated, how are you going to distinguish freebies from what you may consider as welfare, development, sustainable in the interests of the population or the people of the country? Rathin, would you like to? Santosh, how do you distinguish between what's a bad freebie and what's a good freebie?
I mean, it's a political term, and we can come to it. I have no intention of getting away from that subject. All I'm suggesting is that, we would all three of us probably agree that there is a role for the state in providing health services, in providing education services, in providing basic minimum housing. And if some poor people don't have access to food and don't even have access to clothes, well, then they could do something about that. But these are private goods: food, housing, what you call clothes. These are private goods. It's not the job of the government to actually provide these. Unfortunately, our governments have gotten into a mode in the last 6 years or so. And I know the terrible beginning of this. It began with PM Kisan, when we began to give cash transfers. You see, a government which sort of resorts to so-called freebies of this kind, where you're giving cash, or you're giving food, or you're giving these sorts of things which are really private goods in the last analysis, a toilet. It's supposed to provide health services. It is supposed to provide education services. The rest, people are able to find because they have a job. Now, the government's job is to make it possible to have incomes on a sustained basis through jobs. We had the policies in place, at least when I was in government, and I'm sure Rathin, who was also in government at the same time, and we used to have many good interactions with each other. You see, 2004 to 14, I was part of government. And jobs were growing at the rate of 7.5 million per annum. And the reason for that was there was a growth process, which was not only fast, but it tended to be inclusive. I can elaborate on that. It wasn't as inclusive as we would have liked it to be. We would have liked that government to give more health, more education, do more on that, but that government failed in doing it. But at least it provided jobs. with rising real wages, as a result of which poverty was falling. So people were being able to provide for themselves.
The word freebies, I think, originated, which I agree, I wouldn't use it. When it was people who were relatively less fortunate, who got something from the government, that people like us were used to buying by going to the market.
Correct.
And they got it from the government because they could not go to the market and buy it. I'm not a communist.
That's right.
I want everyone to be able to go to the market and buy some basic things from there. And what happens, and also it's gotten worse. And one of the other things that embellish, they'll pass on to Kamal, is that you see, after 1991, if you look at my generation, probably your generation too, but certainly my generation, were the last generation to grow up in what I call boring India. All you could do is join the army, join the IAS.
I grew up in boring India.
And I was very young, and then you got the hell out. You went abroad. You got out of this game. You did something better.
Exactly.
But
we all went abroad.
Yeah, but 91, everything changed. It changed for whom? It changed for people like me. And let me give your listeners an example.
Absolutely correct.
There was a massive change in relative prices of the stuff that people like us bought. So when I joined my first job in India, just before I left, I was earning 3,000 rupees a month.
Yeah,
This is
same
entry-level
here.
government job. Entry-level government job.
Oh, bilkul.
And the price of a Maruti car, basic model then, was 3.5 times my salary. 3.5 years salary.
Yeah,
over a lakh.
and I got one.
Just over a lakh, right? Remember?
I agree.
Today, the same guy, same job, entry-level government job, is getting about 65,000 rupees a month. A Maruti car costs 4 lakhs. That's 7 months' salary. So from affordability, 3.5 years, it's come to 7 months.
Totally.
AC, by the same metric, cost me 1 year's salary then. Khatara Voltas. Now, to buy an AC cost me 10 days' salary.
Yeah.
You know, and I could go on like this. An air ticket from Bombay to Delhi is the worst. I had when I went to see somebody I knew well in Bombay from Delhi, I bought a return air ticket. Other way, I was working for Greenways Bank. And that cost me the princely sum of 7,000 rupees. Today, on a good day, you'll get an air ticket on Indigo from Bombay to Delhi for 7,000. The same has not happened for the more unfortunate people. And therefore, this disbalance in the relative prosperity of people like us and the others is also motivating governments as a national security issue to provide some basic things to people they have failed to provide prosperity to.
Well, so, I agree.
They'll be languishing.
I agree with what both Santosh and Rathin are saying. And I certainly view India's challenges as what I call the 3 U's and the 2 I's. Unemployment, underemployment, unemployability, the 3 U's. And the 2 I's being ill-suited employment, PhDs applying for jobs of peons, which seems to be an increasing trend, and what the ILO doesn't even regard as employment, but which India regards as employment, which is unpaid, informal unpaid work, which has seen a huge increase, particularly people going back to agriculture, particularly women going back to agriculture after the 3 big policy blunders of demonetization, the way the GST was brought in, and COVID, and how it was responded to. Instead of a structural shift from agriculture to industry and manufacturing, what we've seen is the opposite. Going back to what Santosh was saying, in those 10 years of the UPA or so government, while things may have been going slowly, at least they were heading in the right direction overall.
Absolutely.
People were moving from agriculture to industry. Okay, jobs were being created. May not be fast enough. We didn't have this conversation about freebies then. Freebies may have been
Didn't
given,
exist then.
but it wasn't a conversation.
How are the freebies that were initiated by Kejriwal when he said, I'll give you 200 units of
Okay,
electricity?
let me come.
That's a very recent development, sir. The freebies began well before that.
Let me just make a slight distinction between freebies, which purely as a dictionary definition
Revdi.
is a thing which is given free of charge
Revdi.
or taken free of charge, from the kind of social welfare reform which Kejriwal and Aam Aadmi Party claim they're doing. I want to distinguish between, let's say, these free Mohilla clinics, health clinics, and giving free bus rides to women. At least they are, in the case of women, India's female labor job participation rate is dismal. So at least by giving free bus rides to women, you're probably increasing women's participation in the labor force, but it's still a freebie. Okay, it is not a long-term sustainable solution. If you're going to have sustainable human development, and all three of us, have worked with UNDP in the past, which is where the paradigm of sustainable human development rests and came from Amartya Sen and Mehboobull Haq times, then you need to have structural transformation. You need to deal with the structural issues that are facing the country. By definition, freebies are the opposite of dealing with structural transformation. It is the opposite of dealing with capacity building, because in addition to health and education, you have to build capacity.
Layman question. There is a vast multitude of our people who are in need, let's say, of medical attention. You have the mohalla clinics all over town. If you wait for giving them sustainable development, as you say, through jobs and the like, it may become too late for them to actually have access to some of this medical facilities.
So I can
Is there a
answer,
possibility?
I can answer that very easily, very quickly.
We have already missed some of the bus
No, I agree.
in the process, and these people may remain deprived for very long.
I agree with you, sir. But you see, what we are saying is that there is no either or here. We have to provide jobs, health services, and education services almost as a right, all three. Now, the job is not a right in that sense. The government's job is to actually create the enabling environment, which means the economic activity gets generated when the jobs will happen. I'll come back to that, separately, because I think Kamal rightly put his finger on many important things. But let me come answer your direct question. क्योंकि आप पूछ रहे कि वो ये जो आप मुफ्त बिजली, मुफ्त पानी, मोहल्ला क्लिनिक दे रहे हो, देखिए स्वास्थ्य सेवाएं तो देना आवश्यक है. There's just no getting away from that.
Right.
And I regard not only this as a failure of this government, as the previous government, and with all due respect, Kejriwal sahab, because it is, you see, ultimately it's a state subject. Health is a state subject, education is a concurrent subject in our constitution. However, health services could and should have been provided by the state governments, supported by the central government, and neither unfortunately took up that responsibility in all seriousness.
Yeah. But
So,
if you see,
no, I'm not, so let me finish, because I want to come back to your Kejriwal issue. You see, Mohalla Clinic is a very good thing. It's perfectly possible to upgrade many of the health services that are being made available in Delhi. Let's not forget, this is the capital of the country, which we claim is the fastest growing large economy in the world. And this is one of the richest cities of this country, one of the richest states of this country. So if there is any state which should have provided health services of a proper kind, not just on the basis of Ayushman Bharat insurance, because that's an inappropriate model. I'm sure all of us have lived in the United States. We know how expensive an insurance-based model is. Kejriwal thinks he can do it just with Mohalla Clinic. You can't do it with either or. You have to think of this much more comprehensively. If you think of this more comprehensively, then he wouldn't have so much money available कि इनको भी ऐसे cash दे दो, उनको भी ऐसे cash दे दो, because unless he's able to generate more resources. Let me stop there.
Rathin?
Nothing to add, and I completely agree. And in fact, all I would say is that if you come to the south where I live, then what you will notice, and I don't know about Delhi anymore. Never used a public hospital in Delhi. I'm told they're crappy.
Horrible.
But not in Chennai and not in Hyderabad.
Yeah, there you are.
The quality of the public hospital service is commensurate with the per capita income of the south, which is about $3,500 per capita. So I'm not expecting UP public hospitals to have the same quality. The question is, did the South Indian governments deliver that level of healthcare? Are they delivering, for example, cardiac services? Are they delivering, their COVID services? When my mother-in-law had COVID, I was very impressed. There wasn't much difference between Apollo and Stanley Hospital where she went. And my friend in the IAS, my batchmate, actually told me, take her to the government hospital. It's actually better than going to Apollo.
In Chennai?
In Chennai. And he was absolutely
But
right.
that's fantastic.
Absolutely
That's amazing.
Fantastic. Now, so Delhi was in a sense behind the curve.
Kerala, Karnataka, etc., are doing much better both in economic terms, meaning in per capita income terms, and growth terms, it is because they invested in health and education and human development and nutrition early in their development process, and they've sustained that. And the North did not, and believe it or not, the North is growing slower. Forget about Delhi. You see, Delhi is not a northern state. Delhi, Punjab are not typical northern state. You should think of the Hindi heartland as the. Why do you think this city is full of migrant workers from Bihar and UP? Because they can't get health and education or jobs in their own cities. ये दिक्कत है.
As we are saying, we do not go along with the Revdi or the freebie.
Absolutely not.
Now, the question here is, what impact do these have on the economic planning of a state?
Okay.
That's why
No impact. No
No
impact because, John Maynard Keynes, who's the father of public finance, once had said something very profound, which I have had to repeat to many politicians in my life about public finance and affordability. If you can do it, you can afford it. I had to say this to the government of India during COVID, when many people were advocating spending a lot of money, and I said, may I speak a sentence in Hindi? I said, इस सरकार की क्षमता नहीं है. तो जब क्षमता नहीं है और आप फजूल में पैसे खर्चे करोगे तो पैसे फजूल में खर्चे होंगे. The problem of affordability comes when you cannot deliver something. Now what Kejriwal has shown, to his credit, apparently from what I read, is he can deliver something. What Mr. Bhisht in UP, if I may call him that, is showing me every day is he cannot deliver something. If you cannot deliver something and you spend money on it, you're going to waste it. So the correct question to ask is, can you deliver? If you can, the money is well spent.
He was talking about the capacity of people to get jobs.
Exactly.
It's not just the capacity of people to get jobs, sir. It's the capacity of the state.
to generate
Exactly.
jobs.
Generate-
It's not just that. No, the capacity of the state to deliver the basic services that
Yeah,
you expect
exactly.
them to do. Health services, education services.
At an affordable price.
Exactly.
Correctly.
At an affordable
Because
price.
मेरी साहब हो क्या रहा है? मोटी बात समझा दो. मोटी बात ये है कि केपेबल ये स्टेट्स बिहार यूपी वगैरह इत्यादि इसलिए नहीं है क्योंकि ये स्टाफ ही नहीं अपॉइंट करते. देयर आर वेकेंट पोस्ट इन हेल्थ एंड एजुकेशन in all the northern Hindi belt states. It's unlikely that you will find that many vacant positions in Delhi or in Tamil Nadu or Kerala. You will not find that phenomenon there. Because they spend the money. That salary has to come from the state government's budget. That's why the state subject issue is so important, sir.
Yeah. So I think that what the Moila clinics have shown is that it is possible to deliver basic health services to everyone
Exactly.
at an affordable price.
Basic.
Then you need
Sirf
the
basic.
fiscal space to sustain it. Okay.
There are
Hospitals
reports,
नहीं.
I don't know, I have not checked, but
Huh?
I have personally seen the case of quite a few mohalla clinics. बंद पड़े हुए.
फिर तो you have wasted money.
No, that now, but over the last few years and during COVID, one of the reasons that Delhi was able to do better was because of the Mohalla clinics, I was told. I wasn't here.
They had an impact
Okay.
initially.
Yeah. No, but then you
Somewhere,
go into
for what reason I
then
don't
you
know,
go into
but
the
they were not
fiscal
able to
space
sustain.
issue.
They were not able to sustain them.
Then you go into the fiscal space issue, the center-state
The
relations
center state
with Delhi, and who's
relationship
starving
issue
who
is a big thing.
funds.
Who has the power? Who doesn't have the
Who's
power? The
sta-
center is not giving
That's
them.
a separate.
वो सब issues है sir.
Okay, but the model was there. Okay.
Okay, so tell me, in the last or the current run-up to Delhi elections, all the three major political parties are now competing on freebies, by and large. BJP has offered a lot of stuff. Congress has offered a lot of stuff. AAP has offered a lot of it.
AAP's ideology, if you call it that, since we are on Delhi and I used to live here, is the same ideology that you have in. Have you heard of this company called Urban Clap? We do better service delivery. They have no ideology. Their ideology is हम आपके फ्रिज को ठीक करेंगे.
He is absolutely right.
Bas, that's their only ideology.
But they
Congress has no
say,
ideology.
they
Congress
say
has
so
tradition.
accordingly. They do.
No,
They
they
say
are
exactly.
openly.
They are very upfront
So
about it.
the choice between the people of Delhi is here is somebody with a track record who is not interested in Abdul Well. I've been seen. But I think NAP is very tempted very often. But is interested in providing you with services effectively. So on your story of the Mohalla clinics, the voter will definitely vote. If you hear them,
Yeah.
they deliver. That's what I'm hearing. I don't know whether they deliver or not.
Yeah.
BJP is going to say, we can also deliver, but the track record is not very good in the states the BJP rules.
I think that neither of them is dealing with the structural issues.
I completely agree.
Because one says this, then the other must increase it. That happened in Maharashtra. It's not just happening in Delhi, okay? But no one, and not even our parliament, Lok Sabha, anyone, is discussing the structural issues that have to be dealt with or begun to be addressed if you're serious about moving India, forget about Viksit Bharat, even to middle income country status, which means defined in purely per capita terms, 5,000 US dollars. Okay, India is half of that right now. So forget about Viksit Bharat. But no, you can't move to even 5,000 US dollars
Madhya Viksit
per capita
Madhya Viksit Bharat.
if you're only doing competitive populism. And that is the challenge for all parties. That's the challenge for India. That's the challenge for the parliament to actually even discuss these things, let alone come up with policies to address them. That's the challenge for the budget. That's the challenge for everything. And it's not being addressed by anyone.
Sorry, Kamal is absolutely right. Mohalla clinic, because you keep asking us about the Mohalla clinic. The point is, the good thing about Mohalla clinic is that, long ago the WHO, World Bank had come up with a model for basic preventive and basic curative care package. That's what the Mohalla clinic has attempted to do. And they're doing it not so badly at all, which is the reason why, in a sense, they have got traction among the relatively poor. The bottom 50%, bottom 60% of Delhi's population is very much behind the Aam Aadmi Party. Where they are failing completely is, slightly better level, higher level curative care. Because there is a secondary level beyond the Mohalla clinic. The system begins to break down there. Beyond that, there is the tertiary level of healthcare. It breaks down almost completely there. We've already mentioned that. We don't need to go there. Let me come to the second point that, very aptly Rathin was making about the Aam Aadmi. Because you keep coming back to the Aam Aadmi and the Delhi elections, which are literally round the corner, and I will be voting. The point is, everywhere else where they have entered the fray because they've become a national party, they're unfortunately undermining the India alliance. Undermining. I'm saying so in no uncertain terms, with all due respect to all the clever people who are still in Aam Aadmi Party. The best people have actually left the Aam Aadmi Party, with all due respect also.
Okay.
Kamal talked about sustainable development, structural change essential to bring long-term
Indeed, rightly so.
right form of development, which obviously means providing adequate, sensible jobs, appropriate jobs, your 3 U's being called into a larger understanding of what we need to do to create those 3 U's. What kind of structural reforms are essential? Number one. Number two, 1991, you mentioned in another context, it was a path breaker.
Mm-hmm.
It cut the umbilical cord and said, out we go.
Mm-hmm.
If you're looking at structural changes, do you recommend they will happen as a cut from the past, or can they be phased out? That we have a roadmap, first year, second year, fifth year, this is how we'll roll these changes, or is that not possible? You actually feel, and my second related question to this is what Kamal again referred to, that this dialogue between the political parties, where we need to engage in conversation between the parties and say that this kind of a change will have to happen with some kind of a consensus. or some kind of a larger understanding where it's not a party mandate, it is the national.
You mean in the Lok Sabha? That's what I was.
Somewhere the nation has to move towards it. It's not a political party. So how can that, at least that engagement happen where people who have a different background.
Today, unlike 10 years ago, I was no fan of the Planning Commission, unlike Santosh. But if I went to the Planning Commission and asked the economics team there, if the Planning Commission arrived today, what will be India's GDP in 2028? Not 2047, please. Okay, 2028. And in that GDP, what will be the share of agriculture? What will be the share of industry? What will be the share of services? That's all. I would get an answer. And then I would fight with them, I would disagree with them, saying, you're stupid, your model is bad.
Correct.
The per capita income of the state of Uttar Pradesh and the state of Bihar are less than Nepal. I thought Nepal was a poor country, last I heard. Less than Nepal, and so is their Human Development Index.
Absolutely no. We must keep reminding our nation
Every day.
and every Dilliwala that our UP, Bihar, Jharkhand are still part of
And West Bengal,
Africa.
and Rajasthan.
We are like Africa.
Yeah,
there.
and Chhattisgarh, and Madhya Pradesh. But that's not the structure. So, whereas the per capita income of Tamil Nadu and Kerala is almost that of Indonesia, which is the second poorest country in the G20. So,
But still an upper middle income country.
yeah. And so Tamil Nadu and Kerala almost at middle.
Basically, Southeast Asia is
Southeast Asia.
more
So
the
Tamil
benchmark
Nadu and
for
Kerala
them.
are moving towards middle income country status. UP and Bihar are stuck at Nepal. Now, this should bother the politician. I'll tell you why. The majority of our population lives in places which are like Nepal, poorer than Nepal. The minority live in places which are like Indonesia. I have looked at the history of the world in the 20th century to look for such countries. So for your listeners, America is not like this. The majority of the population in America lives on the coast, which is the prosperous part. And the unprosperous part is the Rust Belt. In Europe, all the failed countries, or ex-failed, I don't know, Ireland, Greece, Portugal, nobody lives there. People live in UK, Italy, G7 countries, France and Germany. So this is the peak of our demographic dividend. And, Kamal's beautiful I would say 85% of our youth, do not meet the 3 U's and 2 I's criterion. I don't know what the latest number is, a very depressing number, Santosh. I learned it from Santosh. I monitor it, I'm too depressed too. The number of people between the ages of 18 and 38, isn't it?
29.
Who are neither 18 and 20?
Oh, 15 and 29. We're talking about the not in education employees.
Sarvahara. Between the ages of 15 and 29, all India, who are neither in education nor in employment, I'm sure the number is
not in training.
And not in training. But they're doing nothing. Was 150 million last year. I don't know how much it is now.
Well, it has come down to 100 million if it makes you feel better. But
Much
the
better.
point is, 6-7 years ago, that was 50 million.
50 million.
It has doubled in this period, sir. Not in education. What is the implication? What has Rathin just said? I think your listeners need to appreciate and understand this. What is it?
It's frightening.
Absolutely frightening. Because there are at least 3 other groups other than the NEETs who have to be provided non-farm jobs. I'll come to that in a second. Because I think he's so right, Kamal is so right having pointed the finger at the jobs. The NEET are those who are willing to work. The data tells you that they are willing to work, but they have stopped looking for work.
Even stopped looking.
So they are discouraged workers. When we say that they are over 100 million, and just 6-7 years ago they were 50 million, you can imagine what the implication is. So all these have to be provided jobs. I'll tell you 3 other groups who have to be provided jobs. The first group, of course, consists of the young who are still willing to work and looking for work, meaning the young who are getting better and better educated. You see, for 50 years, this Brahmanical country and casteist country, which of course it has been for centuries, but it wasn't as populous as it has become. Please remember that in 1950, we were a smaller population. After partition, we were a much smaller population than China. China was 550 million, we were 350 million. Look where we are. and we become the most populous country in the world. How did they control their population? I won't go there. The basic thing that you need to remember is health and education. And we didn't invest in that, and we are continuing to pay the price for that. But let me come back to the larger issue: how many jobs have to be created? Because they have a big population, but they managed to create jobs for their young. We are not succeeding in providing jobs for our young. We could do that. That's true. I'll come back to your structural reforms, but first we need to appreciate कि नौकरी कितने लोगों को चाहिए भाई? So who are they? This is the second group consists of those who are entering the Air Force with better education. The third group consists of all those who in 2019, there were 42% of our workforce was contributing 15% to our GDP in agriculture. 42% of our workforce works in agriculture, but they contribute only 15% of our GDP. What does that mean? That productivity in agriculture is extremely low, much lower in India than in China or any Southeast Asian state. Forget about America. Therefore, 6 years ago, we had no choice but to pull workers out of agriculture. What was 200 million has become 280 million. And what does the government tell us? The government, the Prime Minister himself, from the Prime Minister's office has announced, we have created 8 crore jobs in the last 4 years. I turned around and asked Mr. Surjit Bhalla, who is one of their chief economic advisors, how can you create, when no one else in the world was generating jobs over COVID, you generated 80 million jobs in 4 years. How come? How did you manage to do that? The fact of the matter is you managed to do that because you sent them all back to agriculture. When for 15 years, sir, Beri Sahab, ye suniye bahut, ankde bahut mahatvapurn ankde.
No, but the fact that they went back to agriculture, how does it become a truism that they have a job?
No, they call it jobs.
Because
Even though the ILO doesn't call it jobs, informal unpaid work is not classified as employment except by India. Not by the ILO, not by international standards.
If it's unpaid,
Yes.
then obviously it's not a job.
No, but India counts it.
He's just talking about a separate issue, which is on top of the people going back to agriculture. Please appreciate that he rightly, appropriately pointed out that structural change was reversed. There was a process of structural change that was going on all the way till 2015-16. But thanks to the policy-induced shocks, we slowed that process down, growth rate fell, non-farm job growth fell, and then we sent 80 million back to agriculture. It's not just that. Manufacturing jobs fell in absolute terms. Never had happened after 1991. Since 91, manufacturing contribution to gross value added was 17% and continued to be so for 25 years after the economic reform. But it had not come down to first to 16, then 15 to 14, then to 13 contribution to GVA, to gross value added. The absolute number of manufacturing jobs fell. Uske baad hum structural change ki baat
Okay,
karenge.
I want to come back to something that Rathin, as he knows, I was recently in Hyderabad, okay? And I was just before that in Tamil Nadu, okay? And I've been to Kerala many times. The sad thing is that we have these 3 states in different ways which have had much more success than anyone in the north or the west of the country. So there are things that you can learn from Kerala. It has the highest human development index scores,
Zero poverty.
equivalent to some developed countries, zero poverty,
Shall I get you some tea or coffee?
100% education and health indicators. You have Tamil Nadu, which is actually doing quite well in manufacturing, okay, and has also basically provided healthy, educated population, and with a focus on medium and small enterprises, okay. You've got some parts of Tamil Nadu, of Andhra Pradesh that you can also talk about. So there are clear success stories in India that can be learnt from the north.
So my-
but they're not learning because these are opposition-led states, most of them.
No, so my question is it at some level also a state subject or a state concern?
Yeah, it's a whole of government concern.
No, it's a whole of government concern, sir.
No, but overall development is not just a state concern.
No, but if you have some very shining examples within the same structure.
Health, education, very much responsibility of the state.
Health education. Health education, but even small and medium
No, but
enterprises.
when you say the quality of human index in Kerala
Yeah.
is better or
No,
more
it's,
advanced,
it has been for a long time.
why should it be in Himachal?
Why shouldn't it be?
It be also in Himachal.
No, it is actually not bad in Himachal at all, but then Himachal has a 5 million population. So let's not worry about our
No, the basic point is that there is a lot to be learnt from the southern states. Actually, on the population issue, it's ironic now that Chandrababu Naidu and others are saying everyone should have 3 children, okay, because they have actually been successful in reducing the population size. Yeah, so if you want to learn what should be done, Kerala has been an example on Human Development Index for decades. Okay.
So, just to supplement what Kamal is saying, you were asking about conversations. There's one conversation I've been trying to have with entrepreneurs in Tamil Nadu for many years now. You know, the shirt I'm wearing costs 3,000 rupees and is made in India. If you want to make 300 rupee shirts, we import them from Vietnam and Bangladesh. And I went and asked Tirupur industrialists, also asked Gujaratis, but anyway, the Tirupur industrialists, I said, why don't you make these 300 rupee shirts? They said, my wage rates are too high here. So I said, if your wage rates are too high here, go to UP and Bihar. Wage rates are very low there. Then they said, no, we don't have the skills. They said, obviously you have the skills because all your migrant labor on your shop floor are people from UP, Bihar and Jharkhand. Unko entrepreneurs banaiye. You know, I'm not suggesting you go and live there. You'll be very unknown at least and all. So you stay in Tamil Nadu, let them become. Then the real story came out. They are not comfortable with, and this, we have to confirm this. They are not comfortable with working in the socio-political environment of North India. This is an eminently solvable problem. And this is where the central government can actually come in and do some genuine cooperative federalism. Because the South is not a majority. And the willingness, so logically, see, the South is minority population, so either people from UP and Bihar have to come and settle in the South. For cultural reasons, that will not happen. They don't speak the language, you know, there's no interoperability except between Brahmins, the caste interoperability is not there. Or capital will have to move from the South to the North. That's a very good example of a structural solution, which is not happening at the moment. And this is the kind of thing that the government of India should be concerned with. It's an all of India problem, rather than thinking about revdi and chana and whatever, I don't know, kya pakoda, samosa.
My good friend Rathin and I have a slight difference, even though I seriously doubt it. When I came back from abroad in 2006, Beri Sahab, I should tell you, I went from the airport straight to join my position to head of division in the Planning Commission. And when I saw my staff, and these were all IS officers, Indian Economic Service officers. And in a week or so, I had already discovered that the damn guys knew precious little about rural development. I thought I didn't know very much. I had come in from abroad, 15 years abroad. So how are these guys going to help me? So there were problems with the Planning Commission. Having said that, the fact of the matter is there was an institution there. And today, after the demise of the Planning Commission 10 years ago, the problem is that there is no institution which can do a vision building or vision plan thinking. Who's bringing parties together, the right experts, domain experts, plus bringing states together to discuss what plan or draft plan is prepared for a 5-year period, which can then be used to convert it into an annual plan. And all this used to be debated, discussed, and we used to put money behind it, sir.
You know, the minimum, the low end of just one criteria for Viksit status is per capita income.
Yeah.
I stress that it is only one criteria because to be called developed, you need to satisfy multiple criteria.
Yeah.
But even if you look at it in just narrow terms of per capita income, the World Bank uses $14,500 US per capita income at the low end. Most economists, and I agree with that to really be called developed, your per capita income alone should be about $25,000. Okay, $25,000 to $30,000. We are now at $2,500. That is why I said at the beginning, we should be having a plan to get to $5,000.
Exactly.
Middle income,
At the very least.
middle income status. Forget about Viksit.
Should our aspirations go state-wise? Is that a better course?
No, first, you have a vision for the nation.
No,
Within
no.
that, with the state.
Some states are already there in the south. Okay,
Kerala already has a 14th five-year plan.
Yeah.
some states in the south
I worked on it.
have already reached. If you just look at their per capita income, they are not at the average. This is an average brought down heavily by the north. Brought down heavily by the north of India.
But you will not get to that prosperity unless we are able to make the north and the east. I keep telling my southern friends this, much more prosperous they are.
Yeah.
That is the long and short of it.
Absolutely.
And let me give you an example of how prosperity is I use that word samriddhi now, not development. Prosperity is a virtuous cycle. I've been dealing with the budget recently, and in India, before this tax cut,
Then you continue.
Before this tax cut, you started paying tax when you earned 3.5 times the per capita income of India. Now, from Madam Sitaraman's new budget, you will start paying tax when you earn 6 times the per capita income of India. Now, I'm not saying that
The people who should be taxed are getting the tax cuts.
And I'm not saying this is bad. What it tells me is something very serious. It tells me when we were 3.5 times the per capita income, I said our per capita income is obviously so low that even somebody earning 3 times the per capita income is so poor you can't tax them. Now we are saying after 10 years of this government that 6 times the per capita income is too low to be taxed. In England, it is 1/3 the per capita income. There is no country in the G20 where somebody earning the per capita income is not taxed.
But Rathin, the per capita income is high.
Yeah.
The per capita income is much higher also.
No, not much higher. Indonesia is only about 3,500. But they tax them.
Because you gave the example of UK, that's what.
No, UK, the per capita income is higher.
No, but there
But
it's
the-
1/3, no?
Yeah, 1/3 the per capita income, which is exactly the same tax exemption limit, 12 lakhs, that we have in India.
So this is a very important point because it brings us to the tax discussion and, in a sense, the budget, which I do think, given that we're talking one day after the budget, we should say something about. And my basic points there are that it is not dealing with any of the structural issues that we've talked about. There is nothing, pretty much nothing in the budget to even begin to address
Totally agree.
them.
Absolutely.
And on the tax side, in my view, it is a regressive move. It's a regressive move because the people who need, the tax break are the ones who are paying the regressive GST,
Exactly.
not people who are paying income tax. The people who need to be taxed more is the corporate tax.
Which has
Okay,
fallen.
which has fallen. So you're not, and a lot of the rich, the oligarchs and all, hide behind the corporate tax.
Exactly.
So they're not getting taxed at all. There is no increase there. And the people who need the break, which means the people who are not paying personal income tax, because they're nowhere near that per capita income, they're paying GST on everything, which is a regressive tax by definition.
Because if you're rich or you're
So-
poor, everyone pays the same GST, right?
So today, in all the newspapers, much is being made of this wonderful tax break for people who earn 1 lakh a month. They should not be the focus. And in any case, they're a small number. And so to expect that by giving them a tax break, you're suddenly going to stimulate demand and consumption is just foolish.
But
What-
this
what-
is the logic that the government is giving, and all the media is giving. The Darbari media is doing precisely this. Oh, that now this is going to raise consumption and therefore investment is going to rise suddenly. Oh, is it? Is what I was asking on all the TV channels yesterday, all day. Why is it that it is not going to raise consumption? It's very straightforward. Let me explain. Firstly, only 5% of our total workforce actually pays income tax. we may say 15% of our workforce is middle class, which let's say is something like 100 million, 125 million people, but who pays income tax? I'm saying only 5%, because of the 80 million who are filing returns now, much higher than 10 years ago, only of the 80 million,
Only half.
less than that, only 30 million are actually paying tax.
38.
Uh,
38 in the last
Yeah,
review. Now
so-
it will be about 30.
Roughly.
Right. So you can imagine in this situation, if only 30 million of the 600 million workforce, you've given them a tax break, how much are they going to contribute to increase in consumption? In any case, these are.
Which will impact the rest of the population.
This is the point. The basic economics is not understood in the Ministry of Finance or in the Prime Minister's office. So why are you expecting that this government is going to do all the structural change that you would like to see happen? Because in real terms, health expenditure, education expenditure, on which union government does spend, is lower in this budget than it was in
Just to
the.
supplement that, let me give you an example. The revenue foregone by the finance minister's own admission,
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's much higher. The revenue foregone from this income tax cut is 1 lakh crores.
Yeah.
This year, the government will spend 1,20,000 crores on education, central government, which means you could have doubled the education budget without this tax cut. Our total spending on rural development is 1,90,000 crores. So if you're not given this tax cut, you could have increased the rural development budget by 50%. That is the kind of anti-poor choice that this budget has made. And the macroeconomics agree with Santosh, is absolutely facile. People, you know this, we are all from the same sort of class. A large proportion of our consumption basket is imported.
Yeah.
There is a huge leakage happening there. So, by definition, if I'm going to drink scotch, I can't make it in India. I have to import it. My kids are not going to study in India. My kids study abroad, I have to import that education. So, in the average taxpayer's consumption basket, the richer you are, the greater is the total amount of consumption imports that you consume.
Yeah, I want to elaborate on that and the implications for the current account deficit. Okay, because what you're doing now with this tax cut for the people who earn up to 12 lakhs,
That's true.
is you're going to increase the import content
Very true.
of your imports, which is going to make the current account deficit worse, which will put pressure on the rupee to depreciate further, and interest rates to go high, inflation. Okay, so there doesn't seem to be an understanding of this at all. Okay, so India is already a current account, is a trade deficit country with most of the world except the United States. In the case of the United States, Trump is going to,
Bank tariffs.
as already indicated, he's now implementing it against Canada and Mexico. India is not far behind. Okay, but India is a trade deficit country with the rest of the world, pretty much, especially with China. What you're now going to do is increase the trade deficit by giving the tax cut to the people who are then going to import more. They're going to use their savings, okay, to buy more Harley Davidson. Okay, can you believe it? This is a direct thing to Trump. Trump put a lot of pressure for India's tariffs to go down on Harley Davidson imports, motorcycle imports. Who's going to buy this? Where will the money come from? I can bet some of it will come from this middle class that has got a tax break. Okay? That's what they're going to spend it on. And going back to my sort of structural issues thing, it is not dealing with why foreign investment is not coming in. It's not dealing with why domestic investment is not coming in. There are structural issues there. This is not going to be solved by consumption going up. This has got to do with the fact that you don't have a level playing field. Okay? People are not going to invest in an industry that has Ambani or Adani or some oligarch because they know it's not a level playing field for them. So foreign investments not coming in to those sectors, domestic investments not coming in, and you don't have predictability against investors that it doesn't like, okay, in favor of investors that it likes. That is not that is not a recipe for bringing in foreign investment or even domestic investment. So people keep saying, why is foreign investment been going out? Why is domestic investment actually investing overseas? Not here. Unless you deal with these issues, you're not going to solve that problem. You're not going to solve that problem by reducing tax of people earning 1 lakh a month.
So we've solved the problem of multidimensional poverty in large measure, I'm told, I don't know. But we haven't solved the problem of obviously what is a multidimensional structural problem. From employment to health and education, now I'm learning on the external account. We have, everywhere we have a structural problem, which we need to solve. And unfortunately, the government can't even tell me what the GDP will be in 2028.
But coming to Kamal's observation about weaponization or reluctance of investors to come into those industries where there's a likely lack of level playing field, there is always a threat.
Not likely, it's there. It's very visible.
No, that is, would you call it a structural problem or it's only a moment?
No, it's a structural problem.
Wouldn't it be something which is temporary, which for a government, I mean,
No. I mean, it has taken years to.
It requires a different mindset.
No.
Well, yes and no. I think I
know what you're saying, but
I see where you're
it's
going.
now a structural problem.
Right. Yeah.
We cannot go back to the trajectory which we were on, and I just want to remind your listeners and all ourselves, because you kept asking us, okay, how do we go from here to there? We want a structural change. The way the structural change is going to happen is that we should remind ourselves that we were growing fast, and had we continued to grow fast, we might have been a third biggest economy today already.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the growth rate has come down. Secondly, we were for 12 years from the year 2000 to 2012 generating 7.5 million new non-farm jobs. Unfortunately, between 2000 and 2004-05, we kept adding workers to agriculture. That was not so great, but at least non-farm jobs were being generated. That whole process has been set back. Why? Because this government believes that you can rely upon quote-unquote national champions, so-called, and they liken them, I'm sure, in their mind to the Zaibatsu of Japan and the Kaibol of Korea and so on. But they're living in cloud cuckoo land because the Zaibatsus and the Kaibols were all there are two big differences. One, they were working in manufacturing industry. Two,
They were exporters.
They were exporters, and the government expected them to be exporters. Our PIL and EIL, etc., not unfortunately expecting them to export. That just happens in some cases. Third, they didn't subsidize them. The Zaibatsus and the Kaibols were not subsidized. We are subsidizing our big corporates. Finally, our biggest corporates are only largely operating in the space of infrastructure or power. That's no good. They're not producing very much, let alone doing R&D. Those national champions used to do R&D.
They're not creating jobs. It's capital-intensive infrastructure.
Exactly. So the point is, okay, we can think about R&D also, but first we've got to say your approach has to be at least to do what was being done right between 2004 and 14, and what was being done right. I want people to know, because there's been a lot of bad press around that period, only around corruption and so on. And that, you see, there was a private investment that was growing, and it was growing not just by the corporates. And no one was necessarily being favored on a big scale like it is done. Some were being favored, I'm not denying that. But all organized sector was growing rapidly. Corporate investment was growing, and MSME, unorganized sector investment was growing, and their jobs were being generated. Which is why we were generating 7.5 million jobs, and because these jobs were being generated, the labor market tightened, real wages were increasing. This government's policies have resulted in real wages remaining flat.
How many years, Santosh, have they remained flat now?
For 8 or 9 years.
8 or 9 years.
8 or 9 years, real wages have been flat in every sector. And for all types of workers, regular workers, which is what sort of likes of us, for casual, dihadi mazdoor, and for self-employed, and the share of self-employed has under this government gone up from 52% to 58%, which is the worst form of employment, because most of these self-employed are who? One, own account workers, and the other are unpaid family labor, which is what Kamal was talking about. Unpaid family labor means women, children, and even youth who have gotten educated, because there are no non-farm jobs growing and they don't want to be in agriculture. So they say, hum agriculture mein hai, or we are just working on that family farm. So these are the crises. The focus has to be on MSMEs as it was then. If that was happening, jobs will get generated and private investment would also revive.
Just to give your listeners a flavor, lest they think this is not their problem, that this is not our problem.
No, it is their
somebody else's
problem.
The Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, last year in their placement rounds, there were people who they could not place, who if they placed would be placed at a salary where they would not pay income tax. They would not pay income tax. And what the placement officer told me is they told them that we are not going to formally include you in the placement process.
Wow.
It was so embarrassing.
Yeah, IIT Mumbai same.
IIM Ahmedabad.
IIT Mumbai is
Calcutta.
Yeah.
So now it is hitting the middle classes.
That's
So-called
absolutely.
middle classes.
You know, I went to IIM Calcutta 50 years ago. We all had 3 jobs before we got out. You know, pretty much everyone who wanted to had 3 jobs before you got out. 50 years ago. So we have gone backwards in so many respects.
So coming back to our question of freebies, to wind up kind
Surely.
of the debate,
Yeah.
hearing all the discussion that we've engaged in the last 1 hour, how would you like to sum up the question of reveries, freebies, the need for structural change in the way we are running the economy, providing jobs? It seems jobs is the big issue.
No, absolutely. But as I think Santosh said or Kamal said, you know, you don't create jobs. Activities create jobs.
That's right.
So we have to ask what kind of activities do we need in this country. So let me say to you in this context what the problem with the state is, and I'll let the others then begin. I have written about this. Once upon a time when I was a young man, we had a state that was interested in developing the country, in transforming the country. And development is nothing else except what the Prime Minister said when he came into power, sabka saath, sabka vikas. Everybody becomes more prosperous. Some people become more prosperous than others. I'm okay with that. Rich people become more prosperous than poor people. But everybody gets, every year, people get more prosperous. Today we are in a situation where for the first time in my adult life, for the first time in my adult life, manufacturing share is so low. First time in my adult life, there's so many people in agriculture.
Correct.
First time in my adult life, the research shows the probability, even at all levels of income, that the next generation, that is those coming in now after 2018 or 19, will have a better life than their parents, is very low. It's 20%. In my generation, your generation, the generations before that, we were used to the fact that we'd be more prosperous than our parents. Everybody, at whatever level of society they were.
Yeah.
That has flipped. Given this abysmal failure to increase prosperity, the state has shifted, I would say, in UPA 2, they began to shift. And I'll say something very interesting. When I came back to this country to work in the Finance Commission, I met Montek. I was in awe of him then. Not anymore, thank God. Montek Alubade, who was then the deputy chairman or something of the planning.
Yeah, he was my boss.
No, he was your boss. So I said, Montek, I don't understand. We have introduced this National Rural Employment Guarantee Schemes, but things have never been better. You know, the economy is booming. Why do we need an unemployment guarantee scheme? And he laughed. He didn't give me an answer. So it had already begun then, I would say. With this government, it has accelerated to proportions where now all political parties are trying to run what I call a compensatory state.
Correct.
Not a development state. So sorry.
Correct.
I screwed your life up. I didn't give you a job. You didn't get better opportunities.
Correct.
Here's one, what you call bravery or freebie. Take one, whatever, 400 rupees. Take 800 rupees, go and don't starve. So we have moved into a model where in the absence of prosperity, the state is now engaged in what I can only call Victorian charity, that which is compensation. So I think until we are able to come up with a blueprint to reclaim the development state, the most important engine that will transform the lives of people in this country will continue to fail. Because after all, the state is our collective instrument to take this country forward. And if the state is in the business of compensation, then until we change that business process of the state and get it back in the business of development, we are not going to solve our structural problems.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so let me add to that. I think the key is we need a development state, not a compensatory state. Okay, but that can only happen with, structural changes in at least 5 big areas that I want to. Some of them are repeated, but first, of course, is the 3 U's and the 2 I's: employment in broad sense, jobs, decent jobs, not just jobs, but decent jobs, which means organized sector jobs in a very significant proportion, which you can only have with medium, small enterprises having a much greater role. The other is fundamental overall of the primary and especially secondary education, and at least a doubling of the budget in terms of percentage of GDP that is allocated to education. It has actually gone down in this budget to 2.5% of GDP. It really needs to be 6%.
Yeah,
Okay,
completely agree.
it needs to be 6%, but it's actually gone backwards. Third is the MSME policy. There is something on MSMEs in this budget, but it's more about increasing the category of those that can now be classified as MSME and some credit-related stuff.
Yeah, some 30,000.
But credit is just one part of the support system for MSMEs. You need support in terms of 5 areas at least. Credit, of course, markets, regulation or deregulation in terms of making things simpler for them, and technology and all of that. Okay, so the MSME policy to be real has to be much more broad-based. Then, of course, health. Again, the budget that goes to health as a percentage of GDP is less than 2%. It's less than the government's own benchmark 7 years ago. Okay, 7 years ago, the government said it was going to be X%. It's less than that today. Okay, and then this whole area of agriculture and rural industry, with such a large percentage of the population there, but essentially doing nothing, you've got to transform that. And then, of course, the whole area of where is the revenue going to come from? It cannot come from the kind of tax policy that this budget reflects. It has to come from progressive taxation on the rich, on corporates, on millionaires and billionaires. It has to come from a rollback of GST, which is a regressive tax. Okay, and so I've listed about 6 areas, none of which I think are being addressed right now.
Santosh?
Beri Saab, I just want to remind your listeners about what was the trajectory of what we call the rich countries today. We want to become a rich country, but we have to look at the historical trajectory from 1880 to 1980 of the now rich countries. What was the historical trajectory? Their per capita income was growing gradually, but as per capita income gradually grew, the size of the state grew. The size of the state went from about 10 or 11% of GDP, meaning public expenditure as a share of GDP. I'm making a public finance point, which is really Rathin's specialization. 10 to 11% of GDP in 1880. In 100 years, that had gone to, by 1980, to 40 to 45% in the now rich.
You're defining it as total expenditure, right?
Total expenditure.
Total expenditure.
I'm only talking about total expenditure, but you see what your listeners need to know is the following. Why did the size of the state grow as the per capita income grew? The size of the state grew in terms of public expenditure GDP. It was driven by 3 forces. It was driven by health expenditure, public health. It was driven by education expenditure, public education. not higher education, public expenditure, but school education and then a little bit on higher also. And thirdly, it was driven by social transfers. Now, social transfers includes two things, one of which you can think of as freebies. What are those two things that in their case, they consider social transfers? One is called social assistance, the other is called social insurance. Social insurance is essentially social security. That's what I'm going to speak about, because 90% of our workforce is still without pension or death and disability insurance or maternity benefit, which is what we need to keep in mind, because our demographic dividend is ending. We are about to become, like the rich countries, an aging society in 15 years' time. By 2040, our dividend is ending. That's something that we should be focusing on. Instead, we are giving out cash handouts and these other freebies, which is unfortunately the compensatory state that Rathin rightly identified is a problem. It is not the solution, because what it is doing at our level of per capita income is diverting resources not just from health, on which we currently spend only 1.3% of GDP, center and states taken together, when in the national health policy of 2017 of this government, they had committed 2.5% of GDP. So we are half or less today as compared to what we should have been today by its own admission. And he's already pointed out that, the new education policy of 2020 of this government committed to 6% of GDP. It used to be in 2014, when it came to power, 4% of GDP, center and states taken together. It is now 2.5. Can you imagine? Till few years ago, it was 2.9. It is only dropping as a proportion of GDP. So, we can't, this government, all the TV debate is about itne 1,000 crore बढ़ गया. Arey 1,000 crore is the idiot's language. What is it as a proportion of GDP? And which takes me back to, we are at such a low level per capita income. The size of the state is so small. You don't have teachers in the schools or the universities. You keep opening IITs and IIMs, you can't find the damn teachers. You keep opening schools or expanding the number of schools, and a massification of both schools and universities has happened, but you don't appoint them because you don't have the money and you can't find the people. This is not the way that you are going to actually solve the problems of health and education. 90% of our workforce will not receive any pension because they are not contributing anything to it. And the state has to begin to provide for this. I have a model about this. I've written about this. It's perfectly feasible fiscally for the state to do it, along with, of course, employers contributing also. But no one is thinking about this problem. This is extremely tragic. Now, in this last sentence, just to say that if you are going to keep distributing cash for this, cash for that, free this, free that, this is the opposite of a model of social insurance and social transfers, which is what the success story of the rich countries should have taught us.
Naveen, I just want to say one more thing, okay, which I've been wanting to say. Many of these should be rights. So the right to education was enshrined as a right more than 10 years ago. Okay, it's not been fulfilled. Right to basic health, okay, these should be right. They cannot be called Modi ki guarantee or Kejriwal ki guarantee, which is the language now. That is saying this is a gift, not a right.
And our listeners must begin to demand these as rights. This is what our message should be to our listeners. Demand them, because unless civil society asks for it, the state is not doing it. So glad to be reminded of the Constitution. Exactly right. The Constitution says these things.
Home Ministry to काम कर रहा है.
They're not someone's gift. They cannot be regarded as a gift.
So, I think a very illuminating discussion. Thank you very much for putting in some very precious inputs. We'll put this across and hope to get the widest traction that we can possibly get. And who knows, this could be a precursor for structural changes to happen. Who knows? You never know. There's a point that some spark ignited the discussion. We don't know which spark it could be. It could be the spark got lit today. So thank you very much, gentlemen, again for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Naveen.
Thank you.
Thank you.